The muddy water swirled around Lillian Taylor's ankles as she desperately tried to steady the wagon, her knuckles white against the reins as the horses whinnied in terror. "Steady, please steady," she cried, but her words were lost in the roar of the Carson River, swollen beyond recognition by 3 days of relentless spring rain. Nevada Territory, 1868. What had started as a shallow ford had transformed into a death trap in minutes. Lillian had been so certain she could make the crossing before nightfall, determined to reach Kingston by sunset. The settlement was just 5 miles beyond the river, 5 miles that now seemed an impossible distance as the current tugged at the wagon wheels. "Lord help me," she whispered, the cold water now lapping at the floorboards. Her trunk of possessions shifted ominously behind her. 22 years of life packed into one wooden box, letters from her late parents, the deed to her uncle's property, and the last of her savings. All of it would be gone if the river took her. She had been a fool to attempt the crossing alone, but the alternative had been waiting another week in Silver Springs for a proper escort, or paying an exorbitant fee to join the Donovan family's larger caravan. Her funds were too precious to waste, and her time too valuable. Her uncle's letter had been clear: come claim the property by June 1st or forfeit it to the bank. The horses screamed as the wagon lurched sideways, water now rushing across the boards. Lillian grabbed for her satchel containing the deed and her mother's locket, clutching it to her chest as the wagon groaned against the force of the water. "Hold on!" A deep voice called from the shoreline. Lillian turned to see a man on horseback racing along the riverbank. He dismounted with fluid grace, his movements unhesitating as he secured his horse and plunged into the churning water. His powerful strokes cut through the current as he approached. Lillian could make out broad shoulders, a determined jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes sharp with focus even through the rain. "The river's rising too fast," he shouted over the torrent. "This wagon's going under any minute, my things," she began, clutching her satchel tighter. "Leave them or die with them." He cut her off, reaching the wagon and gripping its side. The water was now at her knees, the wagon creaking ominously beneath her. Lillian glanced at her trunk, everything she owned, then back at the stranger's outstretched hand. "Trust me," he said, his voice gentler despite the urgency. "Please." With a silent prayer, Lillian grasped his hand. His fingers closed firmly around hers as she stepped off the wagon seat and into the rushing water. The current immediately tried to sweep her legs from under her, but his arm locked around her waist. "Hold on to me and kick with your feet," he instructed, his mouth close to her ear. The cold was shocking, stealing her breath as she clung to him, one arm wrapped around his neck while the other clutched her precious satchel. He swam with powerful strokes, fighting the current that threatened to drag them both downstream. Lillian could feel the strength in his body as he navigated the treacherous water, his jaw set with determination. Behind them, she heard a terrible cracking sound as her wagon finally surrendered to the river's power, tipping onto its side. "Almost there," the stranger grunted. His breathing labored as they neared the shore. When his feet found purchase on the riverbed, he stood, lifting her against his chest and carrying her the remaining distance to dry land. He set her down gently, both of them dripping and gasping for breath. "Thank you," she managed between ragged breaths. "You saved my life," he nodded, water streaming from his dark hair. "Sam Xavier," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Most folks call me Sam." "Lillian Taylor," she replied, taking his hand briefly. "I don't know how to repay you." Sam shook his head, water droplets flying from his hair. "No need for payment. Couldn't very well let you drown." His eyes caught on her white-knuckled grip on her satchel. "That must be mighty important." "Everything that matters is in here now," she said quietly, looking back at the river where the last of her wagon disappeared beneath the surface. Sam followed her gaze. "I'm sorry about your wagon and your team." "The horses," Lillian gasped, suddenly remembering. "They broke free," Sam assured her. "Saw them make it to shore downstream before I came for you. Horses are good swimmers when they're not hitched to a sinking wagon." Relief washed over her, followed quickly by the stark reality of her situation. She was alone, soaked to the bone, with night approaching and no transportation, shelter, or supplies beyond what fit in her small satchel. As if reading her thoughts, Sam gestured to his horse waiting patiently where he'd left it. "My cabin's not far. You can dry off, get warm. Tomorrow we can see about finding your horses and salvaging what we can from the river if anything washes up." Hesitation must have shown on her face, for he added, "Mrs. Holloway, the widow who runs the general store, lives just down the path from me. You can stay with her if you'd prefer." Lillian appreciated the consideration. A strange man's cabin was hardly proper, but neither was freezing to death from pride. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier. I would be grateful for Mrs. Holloway's hospitality if she'll have me." Sam nodded. "She will. Martha's got a soft spot for folks in trouble." He whistled for his horse, a handsome chestnut gelding that trotted over obediently. "This is Buck. He's strong enough to carry us both to town." Sam mounted first, then reached down to help Lillian up behind him. She settled awkwardly, unsure where to place her hands. "You'll want to hold on," Sam advised, "unless you fancy another swim." Swallowing her discomfort, Lillian wrapped her arms around his waist. His body was warm despite his wet clothing, and she fought the improper awareness of the solid muscle beneath her fingers. They rode in silence for a time, the only sounds the steady rhythm of Buck's hooves and the distant rush of the river. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the sky remained heavy with clouds. "What brings you to Kingston?" Sam asked, breaking the silence. Lillian hesitated, then decided there was no harm in the truth. "My uncle Thomas Taylor passed away 3 months ago. He left me his property, a small ranch outside of town. I'm coming to claim it." "Tom Taylor was your uncle?" Sam's voice carried surprise. "He was a good man." "Kept to himself mostly, but always willing to lend a hand when needed." "You knew him?" Lillian asked. "Everyone knows everyone in Kingston. It's not a large place." There was a pause before he added, "I didn't know he had family back east. He and my father were brothers, but they disagreed on many things. They hadn't spoken in years before my father died." Lillian felt strange discussing family matters with a stranger, but something about Sam's straightforward manner made it easy to talk to him. "I'm sorry for your losses," he said simply. "Thank you." Lillian shivered as a gust of wind cut through her wet dress. "Not much further," Sam assured her, true to his word. Within minutes they crested a small hill, revealing a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley below. Kingston was smaller than Lillian had imagined, a main street lined with wooden structures, a church steeple rising above them, and scattered houses extending outward. In the fading light, warm lamplight glowed from windows, a beacon of civilization in the wild landscape. "It's not much," Sam said, almost apologetically, "but it's home." They rode down the muddy street, passing the saloon where piano music spilled into the evening air, a smithy dark for the night, and a small sheriff's office. Sam guided Buck to a 2-story building with a sign proclaiming Holloway's General Mercantile. A bell jangled as they entered, and a plump woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from behind the counter. Her eyes widened at the sight of them dripping onto her wooden floor. "Samuel Xavier." "What in heaven's name, evening, Martha," Sam said with a tip of his hat. "Got someone here who could use a warm fire and dry clothes." Martha Holloway's expression softened as she took in Lillian's bedraggled state. "You poor dear," Come right this way." Within minutes, Lillian found herself whisked upstairs to Martha's living quarters, provided with a flannel nightgown, and seated before a crackling fire with a steaming cup of tea in her hands. Martha bustled about, hanging Lillian's sodden dress by the fire and wrapping a quilt around her shoulders. "Sam told me what happened," Martha said, settling into a chair across from her. "You're lucky he was riding by when he was. That river's taken more lives than I care to count over the years." "I'm very grateful," Lillian agreed. "I don't know what I would have done without his help. That's Sam for you. Man's got a habit of being in the right place when he's needed." Martha studied her with kind but shrewd eyes. "Now, tell me about yourself, Miss Taylor. What brings you all the way out here on your own?" Lillian explained about her uncle's property, the deadline from the bank, and her journey from Pennsylvania after her parents' deaths. "So you're Tom Taylor's niece," Martha nodded. "He mentioned family back east once or twice. Never said much about them, though. That place of his has been sitting empty since he passed. It's about 4 miles outside town, good land, but it'll need work." "I'm prepared for that," Lillian said, though in truth, she had only the vaguest notion of what running a ranch entailed. Her father had been a schoolteacher, their life in Philadelphia far removed from the realities of the frontier. Martha seemed to read her thoughts. "Ranching isn't easy, especially for a woman alone." "I don't have many options," Lillian admitted. "Everything I had was invested in this journey." A knock at the door interrupted them. Martha rose to answer it, returning with Sam, now in dry clothing, his dark hair still damp but combed back from his face. "Just checking that you're settled," he said to Lillian, standing somewhat awkwardly in the doorway. In the lamplight, she could see him clearly for the first time. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that spoke of days in the sun, not classically handsome, perhaps, but striking, with keen green eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Thanks to you and Mrs. Holloway, yes," Lillian replied. "I don't know how to thank you properly, Mr. Xavier." "Sam," he corrected. "And like I said, no thanks needed." He shifted, hands resting on his belt. "I'll ride out at first light, see if I can find those horses of yours. Might be able to salvage something from the river too, if we're lucky." "You don't have to. I know I don't," he cut her off gently. "But I'm going to." Martha glanced between them with an expression Lillian couldn't quite read. "Sam's the foreman at the Prescott Ranch," she explained to Lillian. "One of the largest spreads in the territory. If anyone can help you get that place of your uncle's in order, it's him." Sam looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I'll do what I can. Your uncle was a good neighbor." He tipped his hat again. "Ladies, I'll see you tomorrow." After he left, Martha smiled knowingly at Lillian. "That man's never offered to help anyone with their ranch before, and half the widows in town have asked." Lillian felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sure he's just being kind." "MMHMM," Martha hummed noncommittally. "Well, you get some rest. Tomorrow's likely to be a long day." Long after Martha had gone to bed, Lillian sat by the fire, watching the flames dance and thinking about how quickly life could change. This morning, she had been making steady progress toward her new home, confident in her plans. Tonight, she had lost nearly everything, been saved by a stranger, and found herself reliant on the kindness of people she'd just met. Yet, strangely, she didn't feel the panic she might have expected. There was something about this place, about the straightforward goodness of Sam Xavier and Martha Holloway, that gave her hope. Perhaps Kingston would truly become her home, in a way Philadelphia had ceased to be after her parents died. With that thought, she finally allowed herself to sleep, the sound of rain against the windows a gentle reminder of how close she had come to being swept away forever. Morning brought clear skies and the cheerful sounds of a small town coming to life. Lillian woke to find her dress clean and pressed, if still somewhat damp, laid out for her. Martha had already been up for hours, opening the store and preparing a hearty breakfast of biscuits, eggs, and bacon that awaited Lillian downstairs. Sam rode out at dawn, Martha informed her as they ate. Said he'd come by when he had news. Lillian nodded, grateful but also uncomfortable with how dependent she had become on a man she barely knew. "Mrs. Holloway, I was wondering if there might be work available in town. I need to earn money for supplies," and Martha waved a hand. "Call me Martha, dear. And don't worry about that just yet. Let's see what Sam finds first." The morning passed slowly as Lillian helped Martha in the store, learning the layout and assisting customers. The townsfolk were curious about the newcomer, and word of her river rescue had spread quickly. Several people introduced themselves, offering sympathy for her ordeal and expressing fond memories of her uncle. It was past noon when Sam finally returned, leading 2 tired horses, Lillian's team, mudded but alive. Behind them, he dragged a waterlogged trunk on a makeshift travois. "Found them about 2 miles downstream," he explained as Lillian rushed out to meet him. "Your trunk was caught in some branches. It's taken on water, but some of what's inside might be salvageable." Tears sprang to Lillian's eyes as she stroked the nose of her bay mare. "I can't believe you found them. Thank you, Sam." They carried the trunk into Martha's storeroom, where Lillian carefully began unpacking its contents. The water had damaged much of her clothing and ruined several books, but her mother's Bible, wrapped in oilcloth, had survived, as had a packet of letters tied with ribbon and placed in a tin box. Some tools and household items were intact, and a small pouch of coins had remained sealed. "It's more than I dared hope for," she told Sam, who stood watching from the doorway. "I could only find 1 wagon wheel," he said. "The rest is likely scattered halfway to California by now." "At least I have the horses," Lillian said, trying to remain positive. "And enough belongings to make a start." Sam hesitated, then said, "I've been thinking. That place of your uncle's, it's been sitting empty for months. Roof probably needs work, and the fields haven't been tended." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I've got the next 2 days off from Prescott's. I could ride out with you, help you get things in order." Lillian was surprised by the offer. "That's incredibly generous, but I couldn't impose." "It's not an imposition," he interrupted. "Your uncle helped me when I first came to these parts. Let me return the favor." Martha, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop while restocking shelves nearby, chimed in. "You'd be a fool to refuse, Lillian. That place will need a man's muscle to get it habitable again." Lillian bristled slightly at the implication that she couldn't manage on her own, but practicality won out. "If you're certain you don't mind, I would be very grateful for the help." "Good," Sam nodded. "We can head out tomorrow morning. I'll bring tools and supplies." "I have very little money to pay you," Lillian felt compelled to add. A half smile touched Sam's lips. "Did I ask for payment?" "No, but then don't worry about it." His expression softened. "Besides, I'm not doing this for money." There was something in his gaze that made Lillian's breath catch. Before she could respond, the store's bell jangled as new customers entered, and the moment was broken. "I should get back to Prescott's," Sam said, touching the brim of his hat. "I'll meet you here at sunrise." After he left, Martha gave Lillian a knowing look. "That man rode out before dawn and spent hours searching for your belongings. Wouldn't do that for just anyone." "He's just being kind," Lillian insisted, though she felt a warmth in her cheeks. "If you say so, dear." Martha's smile suggested she thought otherwise. That night, lying in Martha's spare bed, Lillian found herself thinking about Sam Xavier, his unwavering calm during her rescue, the strength of his arms as he carried her to shore, the quiet determination with which he'd searched for her belongings. There was something compelling about him that went beyond gratitude for his heroism. "Don't be foolish," she whispered to herself in the darkness. She had come to Nevada to claim her inheritance and build a new life, not to develop feelings for the first man who showed her kindness. Besides, once she was established at her uncle's ranch, she would need to focus on making it profitable, not on entertaining romantic notions. With that stern reminder, she closed her eyes and willed herself to sleep, trying to ignore the flutter of anticipation at the thought of seeing Sam again in the morning. True to his word, Sam arrived at first light, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies in addition to his own mount. Lillian had risen early, wanting to be ready. Martha insisted on sending them with provisions: bread, cheese, dried meat, and a jar of preserves. "The pantry at Tom's place is likely empty as a drunk's promises," she declared, packing the food into a sack. Lillian had donned her best remaining dress, a practical blue cotton that had mostly survived the river dunking. Her hair was neatly braided and pinned, and she wore a borrowed bonnet to protect against the sun. The satchel with her deed and valuables was securely fastened to her belt, and her salvaged possessions were packed in saddlebags. Sam's eyes widened slightly when she emerged from the store. "You look rested," he said, then seemed to regret the inadequate compliment. "Thank you," Lillian replied, amused by his discomfort. "I feel much better than when we first met." "Hard to look worse than half drowned," he said with a wry smile, then immediately winced. "I didn't mean it's all right," Lillian laughed. "I'm sure I was a frightful sight." Martha bustled out with the food, pressing it into Sam's hands. "Make sure she eats," she instructed. "The girl's too thin." "Yes, madam," Sam agreed solemnly. After grateful goodbyes to Martha, they set off, Lillian riding one of her recovered horses while leading the other. The morning was clear and cool, perfect for traveling. As they left Kingston behind, the landscape opened up around them: rolling hills covered in sagebrush, patches of wildflowers adding splashes of color, and mountains rising majestically in the distance. "It's beautiful," Lillian breathed, taking in the vast openness so different from the crowded streets of Philadelphia. "Gets under your skin," Sam agreed. "I came out west planning to make my fortune and go back east. That was 8 years ago. What changed your mind?" Sam gestured to the landscape around them. "All this, the space to breathe, the feeling that what a man does matters out here." He glanced at her. "What about you? What made you decide to come?" Lillian was quiet for a moment, collecting her thoughts. "After my parents died influenza 2 winters ago, there wasn't much keeping me in Philadelphia. I taught at a girls' school, but—" She trailed off, remembering the stifling confines of that life. "When I received word about Uncle Thomas's property, it seemed like a sign. A chance to start fresh somewhere new." "Teaching's valuable work," Sam commented. "We could use a proper schoolteacher in Kingston. The minister's wife does what she can, but she's got 5 children of her own to manage." "Perhaps someday," Lillian said. "First, I need to make this ranch work." They rode in companionable silence for a time, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing backdrop. Occasionally, Sam would point out landmarks or tell her about local plants and wildlife. He had a straightforward way of speaking that Lillian found refreshing after the often artificial politeness of Philadelphia society. "There it is," Sam said eventually, pointing to a cluster of buildings nestled against a hillside in the distance. "Taylor's place." As they drew closer, Lillian's heart sank a little. The ranch was smaller than she had imagined: a modest cabin with a sagging porch, a weathered barn, and a corral with broken fencing. The surrounding fields were overgrown, and what had once been a vegetable garden was now a tangle of weeds. Sam must have noticed her expression. "It's not much to look at now," he acknowledged, "but the bones are good. Your uncle kept the place in decent repair before he fell ill. Lillian straightened her shoulders. It's more than many people have, she said firmly, and it's mine. Sam's expression softened with something like admiration. That's the spirit. They dismounted in the yard, and Sam helped Lillian down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a brief moment, they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath on her cheek. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Let's see what we're working with," he said, turning toward the cabin. The interior was dusty and musty-smelling but structurally sound. A table and chairs, a worn sofa, a stone fireplace, and basic kitchen furnishings occupied the main room. A doorway led to a small bedroom with a bed frame that needed a new mattress. The roof had one small leak in a corner but otherwise seemed intact. "Better than I feared," Sam pronounced after inspecting the cabin. "Needs a good cleaning, some minor repairs, but you could be comfortable here within a day or two." "It feels strange," Lillian admitted, running her fingers along the mantel where a few objects still remained: a carved wooden horse, a tobacco pipe, a tarnished pocket watch. "I never met my uncle, yet here I am among his things." "Tom was a private man," Sam said. "Kept to himself mostly, but he was respected. Honest to a fault and fair in his dealings." He picked up the wooden horse, turning it in his hands. "He carved these, had quite a talent for it." "I had no idea," Lillian said softly, wondering what else she would discover about the uncle she'd never known. They spent the remainder of the day taking inventory and beginning repairs. Sam worked on the roof while Lillian cleaned the interior, scrubbing away months of dust and neglect. They found linens in a trunk that, with a good washing, would make the bed serviceable, and kitchen implements that needed only to be scoured to be usable again. By late afternoon, Lillian had cleared and cleaned enough of the cabin to make it habitable, though sparse. Sam had repaired the roof leak and was working on the porch steps when she brought him a cup of water from the well he'd helped her prime. "Thank you," he said, drinking deeply. The day's labor had left a sheen of sweat on his skin, and he'd removed his shirt hours ago, working in just his undershirt that clung to the muscles of his back and shoulders. Lillian tried not to stare, but it was difficult. In Philadelphia, men were always properly attired in the presence of ladies. The casual physicality of the West was something she would need to adjust to. "I should get the stove going," she said, more to distract herself than anything. "We could have a proper meal before sundown." Sam nodded, wiping his brow with his forearm. "I'll finish these steps, then see to the horses." Inside, Lillian busied herself with preparing a simple meal from Martha's provisions. The familiar task centered her, giving her time to process the whirlwind of the past 2 days. By the time Sam came in, washing up at the basin by the door, she had bread warming in the oven and a pot of beans simmering on the stove. They ate at the small table as the sun began to set, casting golden light through the cabin's windows. The food was simple but satisfying after a day of hard work. "Tomorrow I'll show you the rest of the property," Sam said between bites. "There's about 80 acres, mostly grazing land. Your uncle ran a small herd of cattle, maybe 30 head. They're probably scattered now, but we can round them up." "I don't know the first thing about cattle," Lillian admitted. "You'll learn," Sam said confidently. "Everyone does, and the neighboring ranches will help. That's how it works out here." "Why are you doing all this?" Lillian asked suddenly. The question had been building in her mind all day. "You barely know me." Sam set down his fork, considering her question. "Your uncle did me a good turn when I needed it, gave me work when I was new here, taught me about ranching. I'm returning the favor." He paused, then added more quietly, "And there's something about you, Miss Taylor." "Something that makes a man want to help," Lillian she corrected gently. If I'm to call you Sam, you should call me Lillian. Lillian, he repeated, the name sounding different in his voice, almost like a caress. After dinner, Sam insisted on sleeping in the barn despite Lillian's protests that he should take the bed while she used the sofa. Wouldn't be proper, he said firmly. I've slept in worse places than your barn. Standing in the doorway, watching him walk toward the barn in the twilight, Lillian was struck by the strangeness of her situation. 2 days ago, she had been a proper Eastern lady with clear plans. Now she was alone on a remote ranch with a man she barely knew, yet somehow trusted implicitly. The thought should have frightened her, but instead she felt an unexpected peace. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she didn't feel adrift. This place, for all its roughness, felt right. With that comforting thought, she closed the door, secured it with the heavy wooden bar, and prepared for her first night in her new home. Dawn broke with the sound of roosters crowing, not her own, she realized, but from a neighboring farm in the distance. Lillian rose quickly, eager to begin the day. She had slept surprisingly well in her uncle's bed, exhaustion overcoming the strangeness of her surroundings. Outside, she found Sam already awake and working, splitting wood for the stove. The rhythmic thunk of the axe punctuated the morning stillness as she approached with a cup of coffee she'd brewed. "Good morning," she called. Sam paused, resting the axe head on the chopping block. His smile was warm as he accepted the coffee. "Morning. Sleep well." "Better than I expected," Lillian admitted. "There's something peaceful about this place." They shared a simple breakfast before beginning the day's work. Sam showed her the boundaries of the property, the small stream that provided water even in dry months and the best grazing areas. They found a few of her uncle's cattle, identifiable by their brand, a simple T on their right flank. "These 3 are in good condition," Sam said, inspecting the animals. "If we can find the rest of the herd, you'll have a decent start." "And if we can't?" Lillian asked practically. "Then you build up slowly. Buy a few head when you can afford them. It'll take longer, but it can be done." By midday, they had located about a dozen cattle in total and guided them back toward the main pasture. Sam showed Lillian how to repair fencing to keep them contained, working alongside her with patient instruction. "You're a quick learner," he observed as she successfully mended a section of fence. "I have a good teacher," she replied, enjoying the pleased expression that crossed his face. As the afternoon wore on, they turned their attention to the barn, clearing debris and making it more functional. Sam discovered farming implements that needed repair but were salvageable, and they uncovered a cache of seeds that could be planted in the kitchen garden once it was cleared. "Your uncle was well prepared," Sam commented. "He must have put these away before he got sick, thinking he'd plant in the spring." The mention of her uncle's illness sobered Lillian. "How did he die?" The letter from the lawyer didn't specify. Sam's expression grew somber. "Consumption." It took him slowly. By the end, he couldn't leave his bed. He hesitated, then added, "I visited him a few times. Brought supplies, helped where I could. He talked about family back east sometimes, though he never mentioned names." "We were estranged," Lillian explained. "My father and he argued years ago. I never knew about what, and they stopped speaking. I only knew of him through old stories my father would tell from their boyhood." "He must have thought highly of you to leave you this place," Sam observed. "Or had no one else to leave it to," Lillian said pragmatically. "Either way, he'd be pleased to see you making it your own." By evening, they had accomplished more than Lillian had thought possible in 2 days. The cabin was clean and functional, if sparsely furnished. A dozen cattle were secured in the pasture. The barn was usable, and they had plans for what needed to be done next. As they sat on the newly repaired porch steps, Watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson, Lillian felt a profound sense of accomplishment. "I can't thank you enough," she told Sam. "I would have been lost without your help." "You'd have managed," he said with confidence. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. For a moment, Lillian thought he might reach for her hand, but instead he looked away, clearing his throat. "I should head back to Prescott's tomorrow," he said. "I've got work waiting." Disappointment settled in Lillian's chest, though she knew it was unreasonable. Of course he couldn't stay forever, helping a virtual stranger establish her ranch. "Of course," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "You've already done far more than I had any right to expect." "I could come back on Sunday," Sam offered. "Help you with the next set of repairs." Hope fluttered in her chest. "I wouldn't want to take up your only day off." "I'd like to," he said simply. "If you'll have me." "I would appreciate the help," Lillian replied, careful to keep her tone practical despite the warmth spreading through her. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell, the vast canopy of stars emerging above them. So many stars, more than Lillian had ever seen in Philadelphia, where city lights dimmed the night sky. "It's magnificent," she breathed. "One of the things I love most about this country," Sam agreed. "Makes a man feel small, but in a good way. Reminds you that your troubles aren't as big as they seem." The philosophical observation surprised her. There was more to Sam Xavier than met the eye depths behind his practical exterior that intrigued her. Before retiring for the night, they made plans for the morning. Sam would leave after breakfast, but he promised to return in 5 days with additional supplies and to help her continue the restoration of the ranch. Alone in her bed that night, Lillian found herself strangely melancholy at the thought of Sam's departure. In just 2 days, his steady presence had become a comfort she hadn't realized she needed. The prospect of 5 days alone on the ranch was daunting, not from fear, but from the absence of his company. "Don't be foolish," she chided herself again. "You came here to be independent, not to grow attached to the first kind man you met." Yet as sleep claimed her, it was Sam's face, his green eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled, the determined set of his jaw when he worked that followed her into dreams. The next morning came too quickly. They shared a quiet breakfast, Sam offering final advice about the cattle and what tasks she might tackle while he was gone. Then it was time for him to leave. Standing in the yard beside his horse, Sam seemed reluctant to mount. "You'll be all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I'll be fine," Lillian assured him, touched by his worry. "Thanks to you, I have a functional home and the beginnings of a herd. That's more than I had 3 days ago." He nodded, still hesitating. "If you need anything before Sunday, send word to Prescott's. It's about an hour's ride northeast." "I will," she promised, "but I'm sure I'll manage." Sam mounted his horse, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're remarkable, Lillian Taylor. Not many women would take on what you're doing." Before she could respond to the unexpected compliment, he tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode away. Lillian watched until he disappeared over the rise, feeling strangely bereft. Then, squaring her shoulders, she turned back to her cabin. There was work to be done, and she would not disappoint Sam or herself by idling away the days until his return. The next 5 days passed in a blur of activity. Lillian attacked the tasks Sam had suggested, clearing the kitchen garden of weeds and preparing it for planting, continuing to clean and organize the cabin, and tending to the cattle they had found. She discovered reserves of strength and determination she hadn't known she possessed. When a section of fence broke and 3 cattle wandered off, she tracked and herded them back without panic. When the pump handle broke, she remembered Sam's instructions and fixed it herself. Each small victory built her confidence. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself, but she was adapting to it with surprising ease. On the third day, a neighbor rode over an older man named Elijah Cooper, who introduced himself as a friend of her uncle's. "Heard Tom's niece had come to claim the place," he said, dismounting stiffly. "Thought I'd see if you needed anything." Lillian welcomed him gratefully, offering coffee and listening to stories about her uncle that painted a picture of a reserved but respected man. Before leaving, Mr. Cooper promised to send his son over with a milk cow just a loan until you can get your own, and invited her to Sunday dinner after church. "Community's important out here," he told her. "Can't make it alone." His visit reinforced what Sam had said about neighbors helping each other. By the time Sunday arrived, Lillian had met 2 more neighboring families, received the promised cow, and been gifted with a basket of eggs and a jar of honey. She dressed carefully on Sunday morning, wearing her best salvaged dress and pinning her hair in a neat style. Part of her excitement was for church and meeting more of the community, but if she was honest with herself, the anticipation of seeing Sam again played a larger role than she cared to admit. The small wooden church in Kingston was nearly full when she arrived. Martha spotted her immediately, waving her over to sit beside her in the pew. As the service began, Lillian scanned the congregation but saw no sign of Sam. "He'll be along," Martha whispered, correctly interpreting her search. "Sometimes the morning chores at Prescott's run long." True to Martha's prediction, the door opened quietly halfway through the service, and Sam slipped in, taking a seat in the back row. His eyes found Lillian almost immediately, and a small smile played at the corners of his mouth when she glanced back at him. After the service, as people gathered outside to socialize, Sam made his way to her side. "Miss Taylor," he greeted her formally, mindful of the public setting. "The place hasn't fallen down without me, I see." "Not yet, Mr. Xavier," she replied with matching formality, though her smile betrayed her pleasure at seeing him. Though it was a near thing once or twice. They were soon surrounded by townspeople eager to meet the newcomer, and Lillian found herself swept into conversations with what seemed like half of Kingston. Sam stayed nearby, occasionally introducing her to people he knew, but allowing her to make her own connections. When the Cooper family approached to escort her to their promised dinner, Lillian hesitated, looking to Sam. "I can come by the ranch later," he assured her, understanding her unspoken question. "Go enjoy yourself. The Coopers set a fine table." The dinner with the Cooper family was pleasant, with good food and friendly conversation. Their son, Matthew, a quiet young man in his late 20s, showed particular interest in Lillian, asking about her journey and her plans for the ranch. While she answered politely, Lillian found her thoughts continually drifting to Sam, wondering if he would still come by the ranch later as promised. When Matthew offered to escort her home, she declined as graciously as possible. "Thank you, but Mr. Xavier is bringing some supplies by later." "I should be getting back." Mrs. Cooper exchanged a knowing look with her husband at the mention of Sam's name, but made no comment beyond offering Lillian a parcel of leftover food to take home. The sun was low in the sky by the time Lillian returned to her ranch. To her delight, Sam was already there, unloading supplies from his packhorse sacks of flour and sugar, coffee, tools, seeds for planting, and a small crate of chickens. "Your own egg supply," he explained when she expressed surprise at the birds. "Every ranch needs chickens." They worked together to build a simple coop from scrap lumber, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed tools back and forth. Each contact sent a small thrill through Lillian, though she tried to focus on the task at hand. As dusk fell, they sat on the porch with cups of coffee, discussing what had been accomplished during their days apart. Lillian told him about the neighbors' visits and the milk cow, while Sam shared news from town and the larger Prescott ranch. "You've done well," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Better than I expected, and I already thought highly of your capabilities." "I had an excellent foundation to build upon, thanks to you," Lillian replied. "And the neighbors have been incredibly kind." "People look after each other out here," Sam said. "It's how we survive." He hesitated, then added, "Though I reckon some of the neighborliness has to do with you specifically." "What do you mean?" a single woman, especially one as. He paused, seeming to search for the right word. "As lovely as you is bound to attract attention. I noticed young Cooper couldn't take his eyes off you at church." Lillian felt her cheeks warm at both the compliment and the hint of something like jealousy in Sam's tone. "Matthew was very polite," she said neutrally. "They all were." Was all Sam said in response, but there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. To break the awkward moment, Lillian asked about his work at the Prescott Ranch. Sam seemed relieved by the change of subject, describing his responsibilities as foreman and the challenges of managing a large cattle operation. "You enjoy it?" Lillian asked. "Working for someone else?" The question seemed to surprise him. "I suppose I've never thought much about it." "It's good, steady work. Mr. Prescott's fair, pays well." He looked out at the darkening landscape. "Someday I'd like my own place, though. Something about the size of this one manageable by a man or two, not so big you lose track of what matters." "It sounds like you've given it some thought," Lillian observed. Sam nodded slowly. "More lately than before." His eyes met hers, and something in their depths made her breath catch. "Seeing you make this place yours, it's got me thinking." Before Lillian could respond, a distant roll of thunder interrupted the moment. Sam looked up at the sky, where clouds were gathering. "Storm's coming," he said, rising from his seat. "I should get back before it hits." Disappointment washed over Lillian, though she knew it was sensible. "Of course." At his horse, Sam turned back to her. "I can come by on Wednesday after work, help you with the roof on the chicken coop." "I would like that," Lillian said, not bothering to hide her smile. Sam mounted, then hesitated. "Lillian," he began, then seemed to think better of what he'd been about to say. "Take care of yourself. If the storm gets bad, move the cow into the barn with the horses." With that advice and a last tip of his hat, he rode away, just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. The storm raged through the night, but Lillian's little cabin remained snug and dry thanks to Sam's repairs. She lay awake for hours, listening to the thunder and thinking about the way Sam had looked at her, the things he'd almost said. There was something growing between them, something more than gratitude or neighborly kindness. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. Attachments meant vulnerability, and she had come to Nevada to be strong and independent. Yet as the storm finally abated toward dawn, Lillian admitted to herself that she was already looking forward to Wednesday's visit more than was probably wise. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Sam would come by 2 or 3 times a week, always with some practical purpose, helping with repairs, bringing supplies, assisting with the growing herd as they located more of her uncle's scattered cattle. Each visit lengthened, their conversations deepening as they shared stories of their pasts and dreams for their futures. Lillian learned that Sam had grown up in Boston, the son of a shipbuilder who expected him to join the family business. Instead, at 20, he had headed west, working his way across the country, taking whatever jobs he could find. "My father didn't speak to me for 2 years after I left," Sam told her as they worked on rebuilding a section of corral fence. "Thought I was throwing my life away on foolish dreams." "Are you?" Lillian asked. "Throwing your life away, I mean." Sam looked around at the vast landscape, then back at her with a smile that warmed her to her toes. "Doesn't feel that way to me." In turn, Lillian told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, her years teaching at the girls' school, and the loneliness after her parents died. "I felt like I was just going through the motions," she confessed. "Teaching the same lessons, walking the same streets as if nothing had changed." But everything had. Under Sam's patient guidance, Lillian learned the basics of ranching: how to care for the cattle, when to move them to fresh grazing, how to predict the weather from signs in nature. She planted her garden, repaired her fences, and gradually turned the neglected property into a functioning, if modest, ranch. Word spread about her progress, and more neighbors came to call. Sunday dinners became a regular invitation from various families, and Lillian found herself welcomed into the community more warmly than she had ever expected. Not everyone was supportive, of course. Some regarded a woman running a ranch alone with skepticism or disapproval. The banker in Kingston, Mr. Hargrove, made it clear he doubted her ability to meet the mortgage payments that would come due in the fall. "Running a ranch is men's work, Miss Taylor," he told her when she visited the bank to clarify the terms of her uncle's loan. "Perhaps you should consider selling to someone who can manage it properly." "I am managing it properly, Mr. Hargrove," Lillian replied coolly, "and I intend to make the payments on schedule." When she related the conversation to Sam that evening, his jaw tightened in anger. "Hargrove's had his eye on this land for years, tried to buy it from your uncle more than once. Why would he want it? It's not particularly large or special." "The water rights," Sam explained. "That stream that runs through your property. It's one of the few in these parts that flows year-round, even in drought years. That makes this land valuable, especially to someone like Hargrove who owns the dry acres to the south." This information gave Lillian pause. Her inheritance was potentially more valuable than she had realized, which explained both the banker's interest and some of the skeptical looks she'd received in town. It also heightened her determination to succeed. As June turned to July, the weather grew hotter, the work harder, but Lillian found herself thriving in ways she never had in Philadelphia. Her skin tanned despite her bonnet, her hands grew calloused from work, and her confidence increased with each challenge overcome. Sam's visits remained the highlight of her weeks. They never spoke directly about the growing attraction between them, but it was there in every glance, every brush of hands, every conversation that lasted late into the evening on her porch. One hot afternoon in mid-July, they were working on clearing a section of land for additional grazing when Lillian's hat blew off in a sudden gust of wind. As she turned to chase it, her foot caught in a gopher hole and she fell hard, twisting her ankle. Sam was at her side instantly, concern etched on his features. "Are you all right?" "Just clumsy," Lillian said, embarrassed as she tried to stand. Pain shot through her ankle and she gasped, falling back. Without hesitation, Sam scooped her up into his arms. "Let's get you back to the house." Being held against his chest, one of his arms under her knees and the other supporting her back, brought back vivid memories of the day he'd carried her from the river. Then, she had been too shocked and cold to fully register the experience. Now, she was acutely aware of his strength, the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart under her palm. "I can walk," she protested weakly, though she made no real effort to escape his hold. "And make it worse." "Not a chance," Sam replied, carrying her with seemingly effortless strength toward the cabin. Inside, he set her gently on the sofa and knelt to examine her ankle. His touch was surprisingly gentle for such large, work-roughened hands as he carefully removed her boot and stocking. "It's swelling," he observed, his fingers probing delicately around the injury. "But I don't think it's broken. Likely just a bad sprain. Lillian tried to focus on his medical assessment rather than the intimacy of the moment, but it was difficult with his face so close to hers, his hands on her bare skin. "I'll get some cold water to bring down the swelling," Sam said, rising, "and we should wrap it." He moved efficiently around her small kitchen, finding a basin and filling it with water from the bucket by the sink, then tearing a clean dish towel into strips for bandaging. Returning to her side, he gently placed her foot in the cold water, supporting her calf with one hand. "Thank you," Lillian said softly. "You seem to be making a habit of rescuing me." Sam's eyes met hers, and the warmth in them made her breath catch. "I don't mind." They remained like that, gazes locked, until the moment stretched taut between them. Then Sam cleared his throat, looking away. "Let's see about wrapping that ankle." With the same gentle care, he dried her foot and wrapped the makeshift bandage around her ankle, his fingers occasionally brushing against her skin in a way that sent shivers up her spine despite the summer heat. "You should stay off it for a day or two," he advised when he had finished. "Let it heal." "I can't afford to rest," Lillian protested. "The cattle need tending and the garden, I'll handle it," Sam interrupted. "I can stay tonight, sleep in the barn like before." "Make sure everything's taken care of until you're back on your feet." The offer was practical, sensible given her injury, but Lillian couldn't help the flutter of her heart at the thought of Sam staying over. "That's very kind, but I don't want to impose on your time." "It's not an imposition," Sam said, an echo of his words from weeks ago. He hesitated, then added more softly, "There's nowhere I'd rather be." The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lillian's throat felt suddenly tight with emotion. "Sam." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted whatever she might have said. Sam moved to the window, his expression shifting from tenderness to wariness. "It's Matthew Cooper," he informed her, a note in his voice that Lillian couldn't quite identify. "And he's brought flowers." "Oh," Lillian said, surprised. Matthew had been friendly at church and community gatherings, but had never visited her ranch alone before. Sam's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Shall I tell him you're indisposed?" "No," Lillian said quickly, straightening her dress and tucking loose strands of hair behind her ears. "That would be impolite. Please ask him in." Sam nodded and went to the door, his back straight and his manner suddenly formal. Lillian heard the murmur of male voices. Then Matthew entered, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers, his expression falling slightly at the sight of her on the sofa with her foot bandaged. "Miss Taylor," he greeted her, shooting a glance at Sam, who followed him inside. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Lillian assured him. "I've had a small accident with my ankle, but Mr. Xavier has been kind enough to assist me." Matthew shifted awkwardly. "I brought these for you," he said, holding out the flowers. "Mother suggested it might brighten your home." "How thoughtful," Lillian said warmly, accepting the bouquet. "Please thank her for me." Sam cleared his throat. "I should check on the cattle," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Excuse me." Before Lillian could protest, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Matthew immediately seemed more at ease, taking a seat in the chair across from her. "I hope your injury isn't serious," he said with genuine concern. "Just a sprained ankle. I'll be fine in a day or two." The conversation that followed was pleasant enough, with Matthew inquiring about her progress with the ranch and offering assistance from his family if needed. Yet Lillian found her attention divided, part of her listening to Matthew, while another part was acutely aware of Sam's absence. When Matthew finally rose to leave, promising to tell his mother about her injury so she might send over some food, Lillian thanked him sincerely for his kindness. "It's my pleasure," Matthew said, hesitating at the door. "Miss Taylor, Lillian, I hope you know that I very much enjoy your company." The shy declaration confirmed what Lillian had suspected. Matthew's interest went beyond neighborly concern. Before she could formulate a response that would be kind but clear about her own feelings, Sam reappeared, as if he had been waiting just out of sight. "Cooper," he nodded, his tone friendly enough but with an undercurrent that made Matthew step back slightly. "Xavier," Matthew replied with equal formality. "I was just leaving." He turned back to Lillian. "Good day, Miss Taylor. I hope you recover quickly." After Matthew had gone, an awkward silence filled the cabin. Sam busied himself with building up the fire, his back to Lillian. "He seems fond of you," he finally said, his voice deliberately casual. "Matthew is very kind," Lillian replied neutrally. "He comes from a good family, solid prospects. His father owns one of the larger spreads around here." Lillian watched Sam's back, trying to interpret his stiff posture. "Are you suggesting he would be a good match for me?" Sam turned then, his expression unreadable. "Wouldn't he? A respectable young man with an established place in the community, someone who could help you run this ranch properly." There was a challenge in his voice that sparked a flare of indignation in Lillian. "I thought you believed I could run this ranch properly on my own." "I do," Sam said quickly. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Sam ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I just meant that someone like Cooper could offer you security, respectability. Things that," he broke off, looking away. "Things that you can't," Lillian finished softly. The question hung between them, charged with all the things they hadn't said over the past weeks. Sam's gaze returned to her, his eyes intense. "I'm a hired hand, Lillian. I don't own land. I have some savings, but nothing that would impress a banker like Hargrove. I can't offer you the kind of life you deserve." The naked honesty in his voice made Lillian's heart ache. "Sam," she said quietly, "have I ever asked you for those things?" He moved closer, kneeling beside the sofa so they were at eye level. "No, but you should want them. You should want better than a man who has nothing but his 2 hands and the clothes on his back." "Those hands pulled me from a river," Lillian reminded him, her voice trembling slightly. "They built my fences, fixed my roof, and just now tended my injured ankle with more care than any doctor in Philadelphia." Gathering her courage, she reached out to touch his face. "I think they're worth quite a lot." Sam's breath caught at her touch. For a long moment he remained perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might break the spell between them. Then, slowly, he turned his face into her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. "Lillian," he whispered, her name like a prayer on his lips. The distance between them seemed to disappear as he leaned forward, one hand coming up to cradle her cheek. His lips met hers with gentle reverence, a kiss that asked permission even as it was given. Lillian responded with all the feelings she'd been holding back for weeks, her fingers sliding into his hair to draw him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more honest than the careful restraint they'd been practicing. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I pulled you from that river," he admitted. "Even when I was half drowned and bedraggled," Lillian teased, her heart too full for serious conversation. "Even then." His smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Especially then. You looked at me with those big eyes full of trust, and something inside me just shifted." The admission made Lillian's heart swell. "For me, it was when you came back with my horses and trunk. You didn't have to do that. You'd already saved my life. But you spent hours searching because you knew how much those things meant to me." Sam captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I'd have searched for days if that's what it took." The tenderness of the gesture brought tears to Lillian's eyes. For so long since her parents' deaths, really she had been alone, making her own way. To have someone care so deeply about her happiness was overwhelming. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Sam's expression grew serious. "Nothing has changed about my circumstances, Lillian. I still can't offer you what Cooper could." "I don't want what Matthew Cooper can offer," Lillian said firmly. "I want—" She stopped, suddenly shy despite the intimacy they had just shared. "What do you want?" Sam prompted, his eyes intent on hers. "You," she said simply. "Just you, Sam Xavier. The man who saved me from the river and then saved me from my own ignorance about ranching. The man who treats me as a partner, not a helpless female. The man I've come to," she hesitated, then finished bravely. "The man I've come to love." The declaration hung in the air between them, momentous and irreversible. For a heartbeat, Lillian feared she had been too bold, too forward in expressing feelings that might not be returned with equal fervor. Then Sam's face transformed with a joy so pure it took her breath away. "Lillian Taylor," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you since the moment I carried you to shore. I just never dared hope you might feel the same." He kissed her again, this time with a certainty that left no room for doubt. When they parted, both were smiling like fools, giddy with the relief of feelings finally expressed. "Stay," Lillian said impulsively. "Not just tonight. Stay with me. Help me make this ranch successful. We can do it together." Sam's smile faltered slightly. "People would talk." "Your reputation, I don't care what people think," Lillian interrupted. Then, seeing his concern, she amended, "But I understand. Propriety matters here as much as it did in Philadelphia." Sam seemed to wrestle with himself for a moment, then his expression cleared with sudden decision. "Wait here," he said, rising. "I'm not likely to go far with this ankle," Lillian pointed out wryly. He grinned, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead before striding out the door. Lillian heard him rummaging in his saddlebags outside, then he returned, something clutched in his hand. Kneeling beside her again, Sam opened his palm to reveal a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of value I took when I left home. I've carried it all these years, thinking someday I might find a woman I loved enough to give it to." His eyes held hers, vulnerable and hopeful. "I've found her." Lillian's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "Sam, marry me, Lillian," he said softly. "Not someday when I have more to offer, but now. Let me stay with you, work beside you, build a life with you on this land that brought us together." Joy bubbled up within her, bright and effervescent. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." Sam slipped the ring onto her finger. It was a little loose, but neither of them cared, and then he was kissing her again, both of them laughing and crying at once. When they finally broke apart, Sam said, "I'll need to give notice at Prescott's. And we'll have to speak to Reverend Williams about performing the ceremony." "How soon can we be married?" Lillian asked, practical even in her happiness. "As soon as you like. Tomorrow, if the Reverend is willing." Lillian laughed. "Perhaps we should give the community a little more notice." "Next Sunday after church." "Perfect," Sam agreed. "Though it will be the longest week of my life." They spent the evening making plans, Sam tending to the ranch chores and preparing a simple dinner while Lillian rested her ankle. The ordinary tasks took on new significance now, a preview of their life together. As darkness fell and the time came for Sam to retire to the barn as propriety demanded, he lingered at her side, reluctant to leave even with the promise of forever before them. "Sunday," Lillian reminded him, reaching up to touch his face. "Just 5 more days." "5 days too many," Sam grumbled, but he smiled as he said it. "Rest that ankle. I'll come by tomorrow after work." With a last kiss, he left her to sleep, her heart too full of happiness to feel the pain in her ankle or any concern about the challenges that might lie ahead. The news of their engagement spread through Kingston with the speed that only small-town gossip can achieve. By noon the next day, Martha Holloway had arrived at the ranch with fabric for a wedding dress, insisting that Lillian couldn't possibly get married in her everyday clothes. Sam Xavier, finally finding himself a wife, is cause for celebration, Martha declared, measuring Lillian for alterations. Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him over the years. Really? Lillian asked, surprised. Sam had never mentioned female admirers. Martha nodded emphatically. Oh yes, handsome, hardworking, honest, he's quite the catch, despite not having land of his own. She pinned a section of the ivory fabric. Though I suppose he'll have that now too through you. The comment gave Lillian pause. Do you think that's why he proposed? For the land? Martha looked up sharply. Samuel Xavier, absolutely not. That man doesn't have a dishonest bone in his body. Her expression softened. Besides, anyone with eyes can see he's smitten with you, not your property. Relieved, Lillian allowed herself to be turned and measured while Martha chattered about wedding preparations. Word had already reached Reverend Williams, who had agreed to perform the ceremony after Sunday service. The Cooper family had offered to host a small reception at their home afterward, a gesture of goodwill that touched Lillian despite Matthew's obvious disappointment. Sam arrived in the late afternoon, looking slightly dazed. Mr. Prescott offered us a wedding gift, he announced as he entered. A bull and 2 heifers from his prize stock. That's incredibly generous, Lillian said, surprised. He said it was about time I settled down with a good woman instead of spending all my time with cattle, Sam quoted, shaking his head in wonderment. And he's holding my position for me whenever I want to return. Return, Lillian repeated, confused. Sam took her hands. I told him I wouldn't be coming back, that I was going to work our ranch with you, but he insisted the job would be there if we ever needed it. He smiled ruefully. Seems everyone has more faith in this working out than I did. And do you, Lillian asked, have faith in us now? Sam's expression grew serious. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. The days before the wedding passed in a whirlwind of preparations and well-wishes. Despite her sprained ankle, which improved enough to bear weight by the 3rd day, Lillian found herself busy from dawn till dusk with visitors bringing gifts, advice, and assistance. Sam came by each evening, working on the ranch and spending time with Lillian, their conversations now free from the restraint that had characterized their earlier interactions. They talked about their hopes for the future, practical plans for improving the ranch, and sometimes simply sat in comfortable silence, enjoying the certainty of their commitment. On Saturday evening, the night before the wedding, Sam brought her a gift, a carved wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. It was your uncle's work, he explained as she ran her fingers over the intricate design. I found it in town at the general store. Martha had been keeping it for you. Inside, nestled in a soft cloth, was a silver pendant, a horse in full gallop, its lines flowing with life despite the static medium. Tom made that too, Sam said as she lifted it with reverent fingers. He was working on it the last time I visited him. Said it was for family, but I didn't understand at the time. Tears welled in Lillian's eyes as she realized her uncle had been making it for her, though they had never met. It's beautiful, she whispered. He would have been proud to see you here, making his place thrive again, Sam said, his voice gentle. Just as I'm proud to be the man who will stand beside you while you do it. Lillian looked up at him through her tears, overwhelmed by gratitude for all the circumstances, even the frightening ones that had brought her to this moment. I love you, Sam Xavier. And I love you, Lillian Taylor, he smiled. For one more day at least. Then you'll be Lillian Xavier. I rather like the sound of that, she admitted. Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of their union. The small church was packed with well-wishers, it seemed everyone in Kingston, and the surrounding ranches had come to witness Sam Xavier finally taking a bride. Lillian wore the dress Martha had made, a simple but elegant gown of ivory cotton with lace trim at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was arranged in a neat chignon adorned with wildflowers that the Cooper girls had picked that morning. Around her neck hung her uncle's silver pendant, a connection to the family she'd never known but whose legacy she was continuing. Sam waited for her at the altar, looking handsome and slightly nervous in a new shirt and his best trousers, his dark hair neatly combed. When he turned and saw her walking toward him, his face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to Lillian's eyes. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, with Reverend William speaking about the sacred bonds of matrimony and the particular challenges and rewards of building a life together on the frontier. When Sam placed the gold band, now properly sized by the town's jeweler, on Lillian's finger, his hands were steady, his voice clear as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Sam's kiss was tender and restrained, mindful of their audience, but his eyes promised more when they were alone. The reception at the Cooper farm was a joyous affair, with abundant food, music from local fiddle players, and dancing that lasted well into the afternoon. Even Matthew Cooper offered sincere congratulations, though there was a wistfulness in his eyes that suggested what might have been. As the celebration continued, Sam found Lillian sitting apart for a moment, resting her still tender ankle. "Mrs. Xavier," he said, offering her a glass of punch, "are you ready to go home?" Home. The word had never sounded sweeter. "Yes," Lillian replied, taking his hand. "I believe I am." They made their goodbyes amidst good-natured teasing and well wishes, then rode to their ranch, their home together, side by side as equals and partners. That evening, as the sun set on their first day as husband and wife, they stood on the porch of their cabin, arms around each other, looking out over the land that had brought them together. "Are you happy?" Sam asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Lillian thought about the journey that had led her here, the loss of her parents, the desperate gamble on an unknown inheritance, the terror of the rising river, and the miraculous appearance of the man who now held her in his arms. "More than I ever imagined possible," she answered truthfully. And as Sam's lips found hers in the gathering dusk, Lillian knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, the teacher from Philadelphia and the cowboy who had swum through a rising river to carry her to shore, and in doing so, had carried her to a love and a life beyond her wildest dreams. Epilogue. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter floated on the autumn breeze as Lillian Xavier stood on the porch of what was now a thriving ranch. The cabin had been expanded into a proper house with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Nearby, a new barn housed their growing herd of horses, while cattle grazed in the well-maintained pastures that stretched to the horizon. "Mama, look," called 4-year-old Thomas, named for the uncle Lillian had never met. He proudly held up a small wooden horse, carved in the style of the silver pendant she still wore around her neck. "Papa made it for me. It's beautiful, sweetheart," Lillian told him, ruffling his dark hair so like his father's. 2-year-old Sarah toddled behind her brother, determined not to be left out of any excitement. Her golden curls bounced as she moved, her father's green eyes shining in her small face. "And where is your papa?" Lillian asked, glancing toward the corral where Sam had been breaking a new colt earlier. With the new baby, Thomas informed her seriously. In the barn, Lillian smiled, knowing exactly what her son meant. One of their mares had foaled 2 days ago, and Sam had been spending extra time ensuring mother and foal were healthy. "Shall we go see them?" she suggested, taking Sarah's hand while Thomas ran ahead eagerly. The path to the barn was well worn now, lined with flowers Lillian had planted in her first summer here. So much had changed since then. The struggling homestead transformed into a prosperous ranch. Her own transformation from an inexperienced Easterner to a capable rancher's wife, and most precious of all, the family she and Sam had created together. Inside the barn, she found her husband kneeling beside the mare's stall, showing a neighboring boy how to check the foal's legs. Sam looked up as they approached, his face breaking into the smile that still made her heart skip even after 5 years of marriage. "There's my girl," he said, rising to meet her, "and my little helpers." He scooped Sarah up with one arm, settling her on his hip while extending his other arm to pull Lillian close for a kiss. "Mr. Prescott's boy wants to buy this foal when it's weaned," Sam told her, nodding toward the teenager who was now carefully stroking the foal's neck. "Says his father promised him a horse of his own for his 16th birthday. "Is that so, James?" Lillian asked the boy. "This little fellow will grow into a fine mount." James Prescott nodded enthusiastically. "Pa says Xavier horses are the best in the territory now." Pride warmed Lillian's heart at the compliment. Their decision to focus on breeding quality horses alongside their cattle operation had been a good one, providing a steady income that had helped them pay off the mortgage to the bank, 2 years ahead of schedule, much to Mr. Hargrove's poorly concealed disappointment. After James had gone, promising to return with his father to discuss terms for the foal, the Xavier family walked back to the house together. Thomas ran ahead, waving his wooden horse in elaborate galloping patterns, while Sarah insisted on being put down so she could practice walking like a big girl. Sam slipped his arm around Lillian's waist as they followed their children. "I've been thinking," he said, in that tone that usually preceded an idea for expanding the ranch or trying something new. "Should I be worried?" Lillian teased. "Maybe." His smile was mischievous. "I was thinking we might need to add another bedroom to the house." Lillian stopped walking, turning to face him. "Sam Xavier, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" His eyes crinkled at the corners as he grinned. "Well, Thomas is getting big enough to want his own room soon, and Sarah—" "Samuel," Lillian interrupted, placing her hands on his chest. "Are you saying you want another child?" His expression softened, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I'm saying I love the family we've made together, and if God blesses us with another little one someday, I wouldn't be disappointed." He searched her face. "Would you?" Lillian thought about the note she had received from the doctor in town just yesterday, confirming what she had suspected for several weeks. She had been waiting for the right moment to tell Sam. "As it happens, Mr. Xavier," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach, "we should probably start planning that extra bedroom sooner rather than later." Sam's eyes widened, then filled with wonder. "Truly?" Lillian nodded, laughing as he swept her into his arms, spinning her around while being careful not to jostle her too much. "Papa's silly," Thomas declared, having circled back to see what was delaying his parents. "Yes, he is," Lillian agreed, smiling down at her son as Sam set her carefully on her feet. "And we wouldn't have him any other way." Later that evening, with the children asleep and the ranch quiet under a canopy of stars, Sam and Lillian sat on their porch swing, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "You ever think about that day at the river?" Lillian asked softly. "How different our lives would be if you hadn't been riding by at that exact moment," Sam's arm tightened around her. "I try not to," he admitted. "The thought of losing you before I even truly found you." He shook his head. "But I do thank God every day that I was there. As do I." Lillian placed her hand over his heart, feeling its steady beat beneath her palm. "You saved more than my life that day, Sam. You saved my future, our future." Sam caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "And you gave me everything I never knew I wanted: a home, a family, a purpose beyond just getting by." They sat in comfortable silence for a time, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods Sam had planted along the stream their first year together. "I love you, Lillian Xavier," Sam murmured against her hair. "More today than yesterday, and not as much as I will tomorrow." "And I love you," Lillian replied, lifting her face for his kiss. "My hero, my husband, my heart." As their lips met in the silver light of a full Nevada moon, Lillian reflected that sometimes the most terrifying moments in life, like a river rising fast around a wagon, could lead to the greatest blessings. What had seemed like certain disaster had instead been the first chapter of the most beautiful story she could have imagined, a story still being written, day by day, in love and hope, and the promise of their shared tomorrows.